By the beginning of the 20th century, 450 Americans were dying of tuberculosis every day, and the wetlands around the Ohio River were the perfect breeding ground for the bacteria that caused the disease. There was no known cure, and victims would just waste away as they succumbed to their fever, chest pain, and coughing up of blood, their lungs being eaten from the inside out. In Jefferson County, Kentucky, this so-called white plague was reaching epidemic proportions, and it was thought that the cool, clean air of the mountains, together with a healthy diet and lots of sunshine, could help to cure this sickness. So Waverly Hills Sanatorium was opened. The Sanatorium was a huge 5-story Gothic structure able to accommodate 500 patients. To restrict the spread of tuberculosis, everyone at Waverly was isolated from the outside world. Not just patients, but the doctors, nurses, and employees too. Waverly had its own water treatment facility, its own farm, 2 cinemas, a post office, and of course its own mass graveyard for the many unclaimed bodies. On top of a hill and surrounded by woods, it was a calm, safe place to stay and be nursed. Here are 5 terrifying stories and facts that surround the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Hit those lights, sit back, and enjoy. The Death Tunnel. Beneath Waverly, there is a 500 feet concrete tunnel that connects the basement of the hospital to the foot of the hill. On one side, the tunnel has stairs, and on the other, there was a motorized winch system that could be used to transport any supplies that were needed at the sanatorium. During the height of the epidemic, it's thought that 1 patient was dying every hour at Waverly Hills, so the staff were having to dispose of several bodies every day. They couldn't get the bodies out of there fast enough, and they were having to pile them up in the cold food storage room. It was soul-destroying for the patients to see so many dead bodies leaving the sanatorium, and it caused them to give up hope. It was decided that the most efficient way to get rid of the dead was to take them from the morgue, place them on carts, and send them down the tunnel by the winch system at night. Once at the bottom of the hill, the bodies were placed into a hearse and taken away, without any of the patients being aware of anything. For obvious reasons, the tunnel became known as the Body Chute, and many ghost hunters have reported seeing figures walking the tunnel and of hearing footsteps when no one else is there. I honestly can't imagine a more eerie atmosphere. Room 502. On the 5th floor, as well as 2 nurses' stations, a linen room, a medicine room, and a pantry, there is a room that was notorious. In 1928, Mary was the head nurse at Waverly. She became pregnant by one of the doctors, but he was already married and wanted nothing to do with Mary or his baby. Mary was dragged to the operating theatre, held down, and forced to have an abortion by the doctor and 3 other men. But something went wrong, and the men panicked. They dragged Mary, her clothes covered in blood, and hanged her outside room 502. It was the doctor and father of the baby that kicked out the chair from beneath her. The aborted baby was supposedly taken away and thrown down the body chute in the basement. It was then hidden in the coffin of one of the TB patients, who was subsequently sent home for burial. People who have entered this room often complained of nausea and stomach pains. Shapes were often seen near the window from outside, and lights have been seen to flicker on and off. Mary's ghost has also been seen near room 502, perhaps searching for a lost baby. Timmy. It was not only adults that caught tuberculosis, many children also became victims of the disease too. A children's pavilion of 50 beds was built at Waverly to house them. The pavilion was not only for the sick children, but also for any children of patients who had no one else to look after them. The children's wing was on the 5th floor, and quite worryingly, it was right next to the mental ward, where patients with TB of the brain were kept. There was a play area on the roof of the building, with a set of swings where the children could play. Timmy was a healthy 10-year-old boy, and one of those unlucky children whose parents had both been admitted to Waverly with tuberculosis. Having no one else to care for him, there was no choice but for him to stay with his parents. Timmy loved to play ball with the nurses, and he would spend hours chasing his ball along the hospital corridors. While running after his ball on the roof one day, he fell the 5 floors to his death. It was thought that a prisoner was on the roof, the same time as Timmy was killed, and pushed Timmy to his death, but an investigation could not prove that the prisoner was responsible. Reports are rich that Timmy still likes to play ball, and sounds of the bouncing ball can be heard echoing along the floor in the corridors. Visitors to the now derelict building often bring toy balls with them so that they can play games with Timmy, and the balls are often seen rolling along the floor when no one is there. The treatments were brutal. Many painful procedures were performed on the patients at Waverly Hills. There was no anaesthetic available then, so these horrific procedures were carried out whilst the patients were awake. Doctors would remove some of the patient's ribs to open up the chest area and collapse the lung. Sometimes up to 8 ribs would need to be removed, as it was regarded too dangerous to remove no more than 3 ribs at a time. It could take several surgeries before the procedure was finally finished. Sometimes air or nitrogen was injected into the chest area, or a balloon was expanded inside the chest cavity until the lung collapsed. The gas had to be topped up every few weeks to keep the lung from inflating again. As a final last resort, a lobectomy operation would be performed. Parts of the infected lung would be cut away, and sometimes the whole lung would be removed. As you can imagine, only 5% of patients survived this procedure. Sometimes the TB bacteria would travel to the brain and affect the nervous system. This could cause patients to become mentally ill, and they would be taken to the electroshock therapy room for treatment. Electric current would be used to induce seizures and help to ease the patient's symptoms. With the onset of antibiotics, it was no longer necessary for Waverly to remain open, and in 1961 it closed its doors as a TB treatment facility. After a quarantine period, Waverly Hills was reopened in 1962 as Woodhaven Medical Services, and was essentially a nursing home for the elderly, as well as the mentally ill. Bizarrely, many treatments, like electric shock therapy and lobotomies, were performed on the aging patients for unknown reasons. These patients were stripped, locked in their rooms, and often chained up for hours at a time. The facility was infested with cockroaches and other bugs, and the patients were left to lie in their own urine and feces. Woodhaven was closed in 1981 after investigations of abuse and neglect. The Creeper. It's that unshakable feeling that someone is watching you. You can see them out of the corner of your eye, but when you quickly turn to see them, they are gone. Many shadow people have been seen, both in Waverly itself and in the grounds. One of these shadow people that is claimed to haunt the hospital is a man who hates any visitors. His presence is foreshadowed with a feeling that all of the happiness has been sucked out of the world. Disturbingly, he has no face and crawls around on all fours, more like an animal than a man. He is usually seen scuttling along the walls and ceilings of the 4th floor. He runs down the corridors towards visitors, and then runs up the wall to approach upside down. He then hangs from the ceiling above his intended victim, growling. Demonic entities are said to be drawn to places that have a lot of paranormal activity, so it could be that the Creeper, as he is known, is feeding from the energy of the dead. One story tells how the Creeper first appeared in order to protect a child that was undergoing painful therapy. Visitors who have felt the presence of the Creeper are reported to have been so afraid that they have left the building immediately and never returned. The slamming of doors and unexplained footsteps have been heard when no one is there. The sounds of coughing and crying emanate from the walls. Hollow faces have been seen staring hopelessly out around corners and through the windows. Children are heard to sing nursery rhymes, and doctors in white coats seem to just walk through walls. It seems that all of the human suffering and death that has been experienced over the years has made Waverly Hills Sanatorium a hotspot for supernatural phenomenon. The infamous Waverly Hills Sanatorium still stands today in Pleasure Ridge Park. It's now privately owned, and the more adventurous can book ghost tours there. As a consequence of all the pain and death suffered at Waverly, is it any wonder that it's advertised as one of the most haunted locations on Earth? So that's 5 terrifying facts and horror stories surrounding the Waverly Hills Sanatorium, which has been voted the #1 most haunted hospital in the United States. I hope you've enjoyed, and if you believe in the paranormal, then check out our I Believe beanie over at our store. They're a perfect addition for Halloween. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.